Canada just pulled off something remarkable in the softwood lumber industry. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has implemented a $5 billion restructuring plan that's fundamentally reshaping where Canadian lumber goes and how our industry operates. We've redirected exports away from the United States and built up domestic capacity in direct response to Trump's punishing tariffs. And here's the twist. It's working for us while simultaneously creating a housing crisis in America. Let me give you the numbers. Trump imposed tariffs ranging from 35% to 47.65% on major Canadian lumber producers. Canfor got hit with 47.65%. West Fraser faces 26.47%. These aren't small penalties. They're designed to make Canadian lumber uncompetitive in American markets. The result? U.S. lumber prices have shot up to $870 per thousand board feet. The United States faces a housing shortage of approximately 4.5 million homes, and these tariffs are making it worse by creating a structural supply gap of about 12 billion board feet annually. On the Canadian side, the immediate impact was brutal. 22 mills closed permanently. Over 5,600 jobs were lost. Communities that depended on lumber exports faced economic devastation. But instead of begging Trump to lower tariffs or accepting whatever terms he demanded, the Carney government made a strategic decision. Use this as an opportunity to break our dependence on American markets. The $5 billion restructuring plan has several key components. First, a Buy Canada mandate for all federal procurement. Every government infrastructure project, military construction, housing initiative, all of it now must use Canadian lumber. Second, the Business Development Bank of Canada is offering low-interest loans of $2 to $5 million per mill to help operations modernize and transition to new markets. Third, targeted regional investments. Ontario put in $30 million for roads and sawmills. British Columbia allocated $2.5 million for jobs programs, and the federal government created a $1 billion tariff response fund. The strategy is working. Surviving Canadian mills have secured government-backed domestic contracts that guarantee stable revenue. They've modernized operations to become more efficient, and critically, they've expanded into European and Asian markets. British Columbia has redirected 10% of its lumber output internationally. We're now shipping to the United Kingdom, Japan, and South Korea. During Carney's visit to China, Canada brokered a 5-year deal to integrate Canadian modern wood into China's green housing projects. Here's what makes this particularly effective. The weak Canadian dollar, currently around 1.45 to the USD, cushions the transition to new export markets. Our lumber is more competitive globally because of the exchange rate. Meanwhile, the restructuring costs are being recouped through higher domestic prices. Canadian mills can charge more at home because the Buy Canada mandate creates guaranteed demand. The political calculation behind Trump's tariffs was straightforward. This is America First protectionism, designed to shield U.S. lumber producers in states like Washington and Oregon. Trump wanted to make Canadian imports so expensive that American mills could dominate the market. He expected Canada to cave, accept weaker terms, and continue being dependent on U.S. buyers. Instead, Carney's government saw this as a chance to assert sovereignty and break that dependency. Historically, 70–80% of Canadian softwood exports went to the United States. That made us vulnerable to exactly this kind of political pressure. Economically, the tariffs created immediate pain, but also forced necessary changes. Mill closures and consolidation have made the surviving operations more efficient. Global supply constraints created opportunities. Europe is diversifying away from Russian wood after sanctions, and Asia has rising construction demand. Canadian lumber found new buyers right when we needed them. U.S. domestic production hovers around 58 billion board feet annually, but consumption is 70 billion. American mills promised they could expand to fill the gap, but they haven't. Housing starts in the U.S. dropped to 1.2–1.3 million units annually, far below the 2 million needed. The Trump administration and the U.S. Lumber Coalition defend the tariffs as protecting domestic jobs from what they call unfair Canadian subsidies and dumping. Trump claims the duties ensure fair competition. Coalition spokespeople insist American mills can fully meet demand through expansions and dismiss the supply gap as temporary. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has acknowledged housing affordability issues, but blames regulatory hurdles more than tariffs. The White House has warned of potential 100% tariffs if Canada deepens ties with China, framing lumber diversification as betrayal of North American unity. Canadian public opinion shows frustration mixed with pride. People are angry about the mill closures and job losses, especially in lumber-dependent communities in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. But there's overwhelming support for diversification. Social media is full of Canadians praising the shift to European and Asian markets as smart sovereignty policy. The sentiment is, if the U.S. doesn't want our lumber, fine. We'll sell it elsewhere and stop being hostage to their political games. This dispute has deep roots. The Canada-U.S. softwood lumber conflict dates back to the 1980s. The U.S. has repeatedly imposed tariffs claiming Canadian provinces subsidize the industry through low stumpage fees on Crown land. Canada has won multiple cases at the WTO and under NAFTA panels proving these tariffs violate trade rules, but the U.S. just keeps imposing them anyway. The 2006 Softwood Lumber Agreement temporarily resolved the issue with a quota system, but it expired in 2015. Trump's first term saw duties averaging 20%, causing similar mill closures. This is a pattern. U.S. southern producers lobby for protection. Washington imposes tariffs. Canada fights back legally, wins, and then the cycle repeats when political winds shift. Where does this go? Experts from the Fraser Institute and the National Association of Homebuilders suggest this could drag into the 2026 USMCA review, with potential for minor tariff reductions if U.S. housing pressure mounts. The best-case scenario for Canada is that diversification succeeds fully. We create 5,000, 10,000 new jobs in export logistics and manufacturing. Asian and European contracts mature into permanent relationships. Canadian lumber reliance on U.S. markets drops from 80% to under 50%, giving us genuine independence from American political volatility. Rural forestry communities stabilize with new export revenue. The worst-case scenario is Trump escalates to 100% tariffs in retaliation for our China deals. That triggers deeper recession in Canadian forestry with 10,000-plus additional layoffs. Housing projects in Canada stall because domestic lumber prices spike even higher. We become overly reliant on volatile global markets that could shift with European recessions or Asian slowdowns. What should you watch? Outcomes of bilateral talks, U.S. midterm elections in November 2026 that might soften Trump's stance, and shifts in global lumber demand from Europe's green building initiatives. For you personally, this restructuring means higher costs for anything involving lumber. New home construction in Canada has seen prices increase by $5,000 to $8,000 because domestic lumber costs more under the Buy Canada mandate. If you're renovating, building a deck, or buying furniture, you're paying more. New home sales in Ontario are down 82%, partly because of these increased costs. If you work in forestry, your job security depends on whether these new export markets stabilize. Some jobs are shifting from traditional milling to export logistics, ports, shipping, international sales. On sovereignty, this restructuring is a major win. We've reduced U.S. market reliance from 80% to potentially under 50%. That means Ottawa can set policy without fear that one Trump tantrum destroys our industry. We control our own destiny. But let's talk about the irony. Trump imposed these tariffs to protect American lumber producers and American jobs. Instead, he's created a housing crisis in his own country. Analysts project U.S. lumber prices will stay in the mid-500s to low 600s through 2027, adding $6,000, $10,000 to the cost of a typical new American home. The U.S. needs 4.5 million more homes but can't build them affordably because Trump priced out the best source of lumber. Canadian mills that survived are now thriving by selling to China, Japan, and Europe instead. Here's what I think. Trump's tariffs were a blatant assault on Canadian livelihoods, but Carney's $5 billion restructuring has turned their aggression into our triumph. We've rebuilt a sovereign industry that puts Canadian workers, mills, and resources first, free from the whims of a volatile neighbor. We endured closures and pain, yet emerged with global reach and domestic strength. This proves that when pushed, Canada doesn't fold. We innovate and stand tall, defending our forests and futures against unfair treatment. How long will Americans tolerate their own housing crisis fueled by Trump's self-inflicted wounds? Stay tuned as this trade saga evolves. Your vigilance safeguards our shared prosperity.